In 1933, the United States stood on the brink of chaos. The Great Depression had gutted the economy. Unemployment was at record highs. Bread lines stretched for blocks. And overseas, a new political ideology, fascism, was on the rise. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had just come to power. In Italy, Mussolini's dictatorship was well underway. And here in America, some of the nation's wealthiest businessmen were watching and wondering. If democracy couldn't fix the crisis, maybe authoritarianism could. And so, according to one astonishing accusation, they hatched a plan to topple President Franklin D. Roosevelt and replace him with a dictator. Franklin D. Roosevelt had been in office for just months when rumors began to swirl. His sweeping New Deal programs, designed to pull America out of the Depression, were deeply unpopular among certain circles of industry and finance. Powerful bankers, industrialists, and corporate leaders feared he was steering the country toward socialism. And with the memory of World War I still fresh, they worried that FDR's policies would wreck the capitalist system entirely. But instead of simply lobbying against him, some of these figures allegedly considered a much more drastic solution. Their plan needed a leader, someone Americans respected, someone with the charisma to command soldiers. They chose Major General Smedley Butler. Butler was no ordinary soldier. A two-time Medal of Honor recipient, he was a decorated Marine veteran who had fought in multiple wars. He was a national hero, widely admired by both veterans and the public. The conspirators allegedly approached Butler with an offer: raise an army of 500,000 World War I veterans, march on Washington, and remove Roosevelt from power. The new government would keep FDR as a powerless figurehead, while real authority shifted to a Secretary of General Affairs, a role that would function much like a fascist dictator. Butler listened to their proposal, and then he played along. But not because he supported them. Far from it. He pretended to be interested, gathering as much information as he could. Names, organizations, funding sources. Once he had enough, Butler went straight to Congress. In November 1934, Butler testified before the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, the congressional body investigating UN American activities. He told them everything: the meetings, the promises of money, the talk of fascist regimes in Europe as a model for America. He named names, influential bankers, Wall Street brokers, and executives from some of the country's biggest corporations. According to Butler, the plotters had vast resources at their disposal. Money would be no problem. Support from disgruntled veterans would be easy to rally. And they believed the American public, desperate for stability, would follow. The committee took Butler's testimony seriously. Their final report confirmed that there was evidence of a plan to establish a fascist-style dictatorship. However, no one was prosecuted. The report was quietly filed away. Much of the evidence was sealed, and mainstream newspapers treated the story as if it were a bizarre rumor rather than a national scandal. Why? Some historians argue that the accused were simply too powerful to be taken down. Others think the government feared a public panic if the full truth came out. If Butler hadn't blown the whistle, America might have faced something unthinkable: a coup d'etat backed by the nation's elite, replacing democracy with a corporate-run authoritarian state. It's worth remembering that in 1933, the idea of fascism didn't yet carry the stigma it does today. Many in the world saw Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany as models of order and strength in chaotic times. The business plot could have shifted American history onto a terrifying path, one that mirrored the darkest chapters of Europe's 20th century. General Butler himself later summed it up in stark terms. "I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, and told them what I knew of the fascist conspiracy." Whether you believe every detail of Butler's story or not, the fact remains. A decorated war hero testified, under oath, that America's democracy was nearly hijacked by some of its own wealthiest citizens. It's a chapter of history few people know, but one worth remembering, because democracy's greatest threats sometimes come from within. It began with a sound so loud it shattered eardrums 40 miles away. A sound so powerful, sailors hundreds of miles out to sea thought the world itself was splitting apart. Within hours, an entire island would vanish from the map, erased in a single catastrophic explosion. This is the story of Krakatoa, the volcano that destroyed itself and changed the planet. In the Sunda Strait, between the islands of Java and Sumatra, sat Krakatoa, a volcanic island about 5 miles across, covered in lush jungle. For centuries, it had slumbered. Fishermen sailed past its dark, rocky slopes without a second thought. But in May of 1883, the island began to stir. Columns of ash rose from its crater. The smell of sulfur drifted across nearby villages. Locals whispered about the mountain of fire waking from its long sleep. By late summer, scientists and traders reported constant rumblings, like distant cannon fire echoing under the sea. On the morning of August 26th, Krakatoa erupted with towering plumes of ash and fire. Explosions rattled windows in towns 100 miles away. Ships passing through the strait were pelted with hot pumice stones. Yet, this was only the beginning. Overnight, the volcano's activity built into a monstrous crescendo. At 10:02 a.m. on August 27th, the final cataclysm struck. A detonation so violent it could be heard 3,000 miles away, as far as Australia and the island of Rodrigues in the Indian Ocean. The blast was equivalent to 200 megatons of TNT, over 13,000 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. Most of the island simply disintegrated. The sea rushed into the empty magma chamber, triggering tsunamis over 150 feet high that slammed into the coasts of Java and Sumatra. Entire villages were swept away in seconds. The death toll was staggering. More than 36,000 people lost their lives, most to the tsunamis. But Krakatoa's destruction did not end there. Ash was hurled 50 miles into the atmosphere, darkening skies across the globe. For weeks, the world's temperatures dropped. Sunsets turned an eerie blood red. Painters in Europe unknowingly captured Krakatoa's atmospheric effects in their work, including in the famous The Scream by Edvard Munch. In some places, the ash haze was so thick, streetlights had to be lit at noon. Where Krakatoa once stood, the sea rolled over an empty caldera. The island was gone. But nature is never truly finished. In 1927, a new volcanic cone began to rise from the sea. Anak Krakatau, the child of Krakatoa. It still grows and erupts to this day, a living reminder of the day its parent destroyed itself. The eruption of Krakatoa remains one of the most violent natural events in human history. It showed us that the Earth, for all our control and technology, can still change the world in a single, unstoppable moment. One morning in 1883, the island was there. By noon, it wasn't. And the echoes of that explosion still travel, faintly, through history. Out in the choppy waters of the East China Sea, 9 miles off the coast of Nagasaki, sits a place unlike anywhere else on Earth. A jagged gray fortress of concrete rises from the waves, surrounded by high seawalls. It looks like an abandoned battleship drifting at sea. In fact, that's where it gets its nickname, Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island. But this place has no guns, no crew, no sound but the wind and the sea. And yet, not long ago, thousands of people called it home. For decades, Hashima Island was one of the most densely populated places on the planet. Packed into a space barely the size of 15 football fields, More than 5,000 people lived and worked here. Its towering apartment blocks, narrow streets, and rooftop playgrounds were built not for luxury, but for survival. Life here revolved around one thing: coal. In the late 1800s, coal was discovered deep beneath the ocean floor under Hashima. The Mitsubishi Corporation bought the island in 1890 and transformed it into a massive undersea mining operation. To reach the coal, miners descended hundreds of meters below the sea, into tunnels hot, cramped, and dangerous. The work was brutal. Explosions, cave-ins, and floods were constant threats. And yet, the mines ran day and night, feeding Japan's rapidly growing industrial empire. On the surface, the island buzzed with life. There were schools, a hospital, shops, even a cinema. Children played on the rooftops. Women shopped for fresh fish, and men came and went in shifts for the mines. But Hashima also has a darker chapter, one the island cannot escape. During World War II, Japan's need for coal skyrocketed. The government turned to forced labor, bringing in thousands of conscripted Korean and Chinese laborers to work the mines. Many of them were brought here against their will. Conditions were harsh, food was scarce, safety precautions were minimal. Many died underground. Their bodies never recovered from the tunnels beneath the sea. After the war, life on Hashima returned to its strange normal. For decades, the island thrived as a coal powerhouse. But by the 1960s, coal was losing its importance. Japan shifted to oil, and one by one, the mines shut down. On January 15, 1974, Mitsubishi announced that Hashima's mine would close. And just like that, the island's fate was sealed. Residents were given only weeks to leave. Families packed what they could carry. Furniture, toys, dishes, anything not absolutely necessary was left behind. When the last boat pulled away, the island was silent for the first time in almost a century. For decades, no one returned. The concrete buildings began to crumble in the salt air. Roofs collapsed. Windows shattered. The sea pounded the seawalls. The island became a hollow shell, a ghost city standing alone in the waves. Today, Hashima is a shadow of what it once was. Rusted metal juts from broken walls. Whole apartment blocks lean at dangerous angles. Staircases lead to nowhere. In the wind, you can almost hear echoes, the laughter of children, the rumble of mining carts, the hum of a city that once thrived. In 2009, parts of Hashima were opened to tourists. Boats now take visitors to the edge of the island, and guided tours lead them through safe, reinforced areas. But most of Hashima remains off-limits, too dangerous to explore. The island is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its industrial history, though not without controversy. The forced labor that took place here is an uncomfortable truth, one that many feel should be remembered alongside its achievements. Looking at Hashima now, it's hard to believe that just 50 years ago, it was a bustling community. The sheer density, the isolation, the intense dependence on a single resource. It was a world unto itself. Today, it stands as a haunting reminder. A reminder of human ambition and ingenuity, of the price paid for progress, and of how quickly a thriving city can become nothing more than a memory. The waves crash against the seawalls, and the wind whistles through the ruins. The battleship island remains anchored in time, its story told in concrete and silence. Imagine waking up in a town where the streets crack open, smoke hisses from the ground, and the earth beneath your feet is on fire. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, a real town that was wiped off the map by a fire that's still burning, more than 60 years later. In the early 20th century, Centralia was your typical Pennsylvania mining town. Small, tight-knit, built on coal. At its peak, over 2,000 residents called it home. There were churches, schools, businesses, everything you'd expect. But beneath it all lay an enormous vein of anthracite coal, a kind of slow-burning fuel and a ticking time bomb. Centralia was quite literally built on firewood. The spark came in May 1962. Town officials, trying to clean up a landfill near the local cemetery, did what they'd done before, set it on fire. But this time, the flames slipped through a hidden crack in the pit, straight into the vast underground coal seams below. At first, no one thought much of it, just some extra smoke, a few hot spots. But the fire wouldn't die. It couldn't die. The coal underground ignited like a fuse, and it started to spread. Over the next few years, strange things began to happen. Smoke seeped from the ground. Roads buckled. The smell of sulfur filled the air. People noticed the ground was hot to the touch. Some basements reached temperatures of 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And then came the gas, the deadly carbon monoxide that started silently creeping into homes. In 1979, a gas station owner checked his underground tank and found the gasoline was at nearly 180 degrees Fahrenheit. It was clear. Centralia was burning from below. The true breaking point came in 1981. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking in his grandmother's backyard when the ground literally opened beneath him. A sinkhole, 150 feet deep, nearly swallowed him whole. Smoke and toxic gas spewed out. He survived, clinging to a tree root until rescued. But that moment marked a turning point. Centralia wasn't just unstable, it was lethal. The federal government stepped in, and the exodus began. In 1984, Congress allocated over $40 million to relocate residents. Most accepted buyouts and left. By the 1990s, homes were demolished, buildings condemned, streets were closed off, zip codes were revoked. And by 2002, Centralia was officially erased from maps. What had once been a living, breathing town was now a ghost town haunted by a fire no one could stop. A handful of residents refused to leave. By 2010, only 5 homes were still occupied. The state allowed them to stay until they passed away, after which their land would be reclaimed. Today, Centralia has no functioning government, no stores, no mail, no police force. But the fire below? It still burns through miles of coal seams, with enough fuel to last another 250 years. Centralia is a cautionary tale of hubris, of negligence, and of what happens when you build your world atop a powder keg. There are no flames visible now, but the earth beneath Centralia is still hot, still toxic, still alive. A town that vanished not by war, not by plague, but by a fire that never stops. Like stories like this? Subscribe for more strange and forgotten moments in history. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones burning quietly beneath your feet. Imagine a single sentence, one false report, powerful enough to keep Hitler from invading Britain, to reshape the course of World War II, and perhaps save millions of lives. This is the story of a spy whose weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb, but a carefully crafted lie. In 1940, Nazi Germany stood at the peak of its power. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. The Low Countries had been crushed. And Britain, isolated, bombed nightly in the Blitz, was preparing for what many believed was inevitable: a German invasion across the English Channel. Hitler's plan was called Operation Sea Lion. If it succeeded, Britain could be knocked out of the war, leaving Nazi Germany supreme in Europe. But there was one crucial obstacle. Hitler feared Britain might not be fighting alone. He wondered if the Soviet Union, or even the United States, might be ready to step in. Into this moment of tension stepped a man named Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard with no formal military training, no experience as a spy, and no deep ties to either side. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary man who hated fascism and wanted to make a difference. At first, both Britain and America turned him down when he offered to help. But Juan had an idea. If nobody would recruit him, he would recruit himself. On his own, Pujol approached the Germans and pretended to be a loyal Nazi supporter. They accepted him and instructed him to build a spy network in Britain. There was only one problem. Juan wasn't in Britain. He was in Lisbon, Portugal. So he invented the entire thing. He fabricated reports, invented imaginary agents, and even submitted fake receipts to make the operation seem real. His network eventually included 27 fictional characters, couriers, officials, even supposed British soldiers, all existing only in his imagination. But Pujol's most important contribution would come in 1944, on the eve of the Allied invasion of France. By then, the British had discovered him, realized his potential, and turned him into a double agent. His code name? Garbo. The Germans desperately needed to know where the Allied invasion would land. Would it be Normandy? Or perhaps Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the Channel? Through his false network, Pujol fed the Nazis the biggest lie of the war, that the invasion at Normandy was only a diversion. The real invasion, he told them, would come later at Calais. The deception worked. Hitler, convinced by Pujol's reports, refused to release critical reinforcements to Normandy. Panzer divisions and infantry that could have slaughtered the Allies on D-Day were held back, waiting for an attack at Calais that never came. Historians believe this single deception-one lie may have shortened the war by years. Without it, the beaches of Normandy might have run red with Allied blood, and Operation Overlord could have failed. After the war, Juan Pujol disappeared. To the Germans, he was still their loyal spy, and they even awarded him the Iron Cross for his service. To the British, he was a hero, quietly decorated with the Order of the British Empire. For decades, few people knew the true scale of his work. But when historians pieced together his story, one truth became clear. Sometimes the fate of nations rests not on armies or weapons, but on a well-placed deception. The tale of Juan Pujol Garcia Garbo reminds us of the strange, shadowy power of intelligence work. His single lie helped prevent disaster, saved untold lives, and changed the outcome of the most destructive war in human history. So the next time you hear the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword," remember, one man, armed only with words, tricked an empire and stopped a world war. On November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man in a suit and dark sunglasses boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 in Portland, Oregon. He carried a briefcase and looked like any other businessman, but within hours, he would commit one of the most daring crimes in American history, hijacking a plane, demanding a ransom of $200,000 and then disappearing forever. His name? D.B. Cooper, or at least, that's what the world came to call him. To this day, no one knows who he was, where he came from, or what became of him. The flight was a short trip from Portland to Seattle, only about 30 minutes long. After takeoff, Cooper quietly passed a note to a flight attendant. At first, she assumed it was his phone number, but when she tucked it away, he leaned closer and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Inside his briefcase, he showed her red sticks and wires. Whether real or fake, no one knows. Cooper then calmly issued his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the plane for a longer trip. Despite the danger, passengers weren't told what was happening. Many thought the delay in Seattle was just routine. The crew worked with the FBI and the airline, who scrambled to meet Cooper's demands. When the plane landed, the ransom and parachutes were delivered. Cooper released the 36 passengers unharmed, but kept the crew aboard. With the money in hand, Cooper instructed the pilots to take off again, this time heading south toward Mexico City. He demanded the plane fly low, at 10,000 feet, with the landing gear down and the cabin unpressurized. Somewhere over the dense forests of Washington, in heavy rain and freezing winds, Cooper opened the rear staircase of the Boeing 727. With $200,000 strapped to him, worth over $1 million today, he jumped into the night. When the plane landed hours later, Cooper was gone. No trace of him was found on board, and despite an immediate search, he seemed to have vanished into thin air. The FBI launched one of the longest and most extensive manhunts in U.S. history. Thousands of people were investigated, from military paratroopers to escaped criminals. The search focused on a rugged area near the Columbia River, where Cooper was believed to have landed. But the wilderness was unforgiving. Thick forests, freezing temperatures, and dangerous rivers. Many experts doubted he could have survived. For years, no solid evidence surfaced. Then, in 1980, a young boy camping with his family discovered 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills buried along the Columbia River, still wrapped in rubber bands. They matched the serial numbers of Cooper's ransom money. This discovery reignited the mystery, but it raised more questions than answers. Had Cooper drowned, or had he buried the money himself? Over the decades, countless suspects have been named. Richard McCoy, a Vietnam veteran who hijacked a plane in a nearly identical fashion just months later. Kenneth Christensen, a former airline employee who fit the description. Even theories about Cooper being an ex-CIA agent, or that he was a skilled skydiver who pulled off the ultimate escape. But despite all the theories, no suspect has ever been definitively linked to the crime. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the case, admitting they may never solve it. More than 50 years later, the legend of D.B. Cooper continues to grow. Was he a clever criminal who escaped with a fortune, or a desperate man who never survived the jump? The mystery has inspired books, films, and endless speculation. But one thing is certain: D.B. Cooper remains the only person in U.S. history to successfully hijack a commercial airliner and escape without a trace. And unless new evidence is found, his true identity may remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. Imagine 6 teenage boys, alone, on a remote island, no adults, no rescue, no rules. For more than a year. You might be thinking, this sounds exactly like Lord of the Flies. Chaos, violence, the breakdown of civilization. But this isn't fiction. This really happened. And the result? It was the exact opposite of what William Golding imagined. This is the real Lord of the Flies. And it's a story of resilience, cooperation, and hope. It was 1965. 6 boys from Tonga, aged 13 to 16, were students at a Catholic boarding school. They were close friends, bored, adventurous, and a little rebellious. One day, they decided to borrow a local fisherman's boat and set off on what they thought would be a fun getaway. No one packed a map, or a compass, or even enough food. They set sail into the Pacific Ocean and vanished. A storm quickly tore apart their sails and broke their rudder. For 8 days they drifted on open water, surviving on rainwater and raw fish they caught with their hands. On the 8th day, land appeared. Atta, a small, uninhabited volcanic island about 100 miles from Tonga. They had no idea how long they'd be there. Instead of descending into tribal warfare like the fictional boys in Lord of the Flies, the real boys did the opposite. They organized themselves. They built a food garden. They crafted makeshift huts. They created a rotating schedule of chores. They even built a gym and a badminton court. Every day, they began with prayer and song, and every conflict was resolved peacefully. When one boy broke his leg, the others carefully set it with sticks and leaves and nursed him back to health. The boys formed a true community. They caught fish, collected rainwater in hollowed-out tree trunks, and tended a small garden they built on the island's rocky terrain. When one got discouraged, the others supported him. When they argued, they'd take time apart, cool off, and then talk it out. Over time, their hair grew long, their clothes tattered, but their bond only strengthened. They were stranded for 15 months. One day, an Australian fisherman named Peter Warner happened to be sailing past the island. He noticed a strange patch of burnt vegetation on the cliffs, a sign of human activity. He sent a scout boat. What they found stunned them. 6 healthy, smiling boys waving frantically. When they returned home, everyone had assumed they had died. Funerals had been held. Families had mourned. Their return was nothing short of miraculous. Their story made headlines around the world. But then, as with so many remarkable stories, it faded into obscurity. Peter Warner helped them avoid punishment for stealing the boat, and even gave them jobs on his crew. Years later, the tale was rediscovered by historian Rutger Bregman, who called it one of the most inspiring real-life stories of survival ever recorded. In fact, it directly challenges a deep, cynical belief that humans, left to their own devices, will turn savage. These boys proved otherwise. The real Lord of the Flies wasn't a descent into chaos. It was a triumph of friendship, cooperation, and the human spirit. 6 boys, 1 island, 15 months. No adults, no rules. And not only did they survive, they thrived. In a world so quick to assume the worst about human nature, maybe this story is exactly what we need to remember. In the mid-19th century, a poor schoolteacher from southern China had a vision. He believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, sent by God to destroy demons and cleanse the earth. Within a few years, this man would lead one of the bloodiest civil wars in human history. His name was Hong Xiuquan, and he nearly brought down the Qing Dynasty. Born in 1814, Hong was the son of poor farmers in Guangdong province. He studied hard and repeatedly took the imperial civil service exams, the only way for commoners to rise in society. But he failed, again and again. After his final failure, he fell ill. Delirious and exhausted, he had a series of visions. In them, he saw a heavenly father figure giving him a sword and sending him to slay demons. Years later, after reading a Christian pamphlet, Hong connected the dots. He believed the visions were divine. He wasn't just a man, he was divinely chosen, the brother of Jesus Christ. And his mission? To rid China of corruption, idolatry, and the Manchu-led Qing Dynasty. In 1851, Hong declared the birth of a new kingdom, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. He and his followers launched a rebellion to seize control of China. What began as a spiritual movement became a full-scale war. The Taipings were fanatically devoted. They believed they were building a kingdom of equality and purity. They banned opium, alcohol, gambling, and foot-binding. Land was to be shared. Men and women were treated more equally, at least in theory. But the rebellion was not peaceful. They marched through the countryside, converting by sword and executing dissenters. Cities were taken, looted, and burned. In 1853, the rebels captured Nanjing, one of China's great cities, and made it their capital. For over a decade, the Qing Empire teetered on collapse. At its height, the Taiping Rebellion controlled territory home to 30 million people. The war it sparked would become one of the deadliest conflicts in history, with estimated death tolls ranging from 20 to 30 million. But while Hong called himself king, he rarely led on the battlefield. Isolated in his palace, he became more mystical, more detached, even paranoid. He reportedly lived in luxury, surrounded by concubines and trusted few. Eventually, cracks formed. The Qing, with help from Western powers and local militias, began to reclaim territory. In 1864, Qing forces stormed Nanjing. The city was consumed in fire and blood. Hong Xiuquan was already dead, either from illness or suicide. His body was found rotting in his palace. The Qing cremated it, scattered his ashes, and buried his legacy in shame. But the legacy refused to die. The Taiping Rebellion exposed the fragility of the Qing dynasty. It revealed the power of ideology, the desperation of the poor, and the chaos that could come from a single man's vision. A poor schoolteacher, rejected by the system, claimed he was divine, and very nearly toppled an empire. Imagine this. You're a soldier, loyal to your king. You bleed on the battlefield in his name. And then, he executes you. Not for treason, not for mutiny, but as a warning to everyone else. This is the brutal story of Peter the Cruel, the king who turned on his own army. Peter White of Castile became king in 1350. He was just 15 years old. Young, unproven, but charismatic. At first, they called him Peter the Just. He promised order, law, fairness. But power changed him, and his new name would be Peter the Cruel. Peter ruled with an iron fist. He executed nobles, clergy, even family. But his most infamous act came during the Castilian Civil War. And it didn't target his enemies. It targeted his own men. In 1359, Peter crushed a rebel stronghold at the town of Toro. Victory was his. His army returned, expecting praise, rewards, honor. Instead, he accused them of cowardice. He said they hadn't fought hard enough, that they'd shown fear, and that fear could spread. So he did the unthinkable. He ordered the execution of hundreds of his own soldiers. No trial, no mercy, just a public warning. Loyalty isn't enough. Why would he do this? Was it madness or strategy? Some say he was paranoid, obsessed with betrayal. Others say he wanted to rule by fear. But whatever the reason, it backfired. Morale collapsed, troops defected, and the king's name was forever stained. In 1369, his half-brother returned with an army, captured Peter, and killed him, stabbed to death. By men who once swore loyalty, Peter the Cruel died as he ruled, brutally, alone, surrounded by enemies wearing the faces of allies. So what makes a king truly powerful? Maybe it's not fear. Maybe it's trust. Want more stories of ruthless rulers and forgotten battles? Hit subscribe and don't miss the next one. In the summer of 1518, a woman stepped into the streets of Strasbourg and began to dance. She didn't stop for hours and days. Then others joined her. Dozens, then hundreds. They danced until their feet bled, until they collapsed. Some until they died, and no one knew why. This is the story of the Dancing Plague, one of history's strangest and most disturbing mass events. It began with a single woman, Frau Trophäa. One hot day in July 1518, she began to twist, sway, and spin in the middle of the street. Witnesses say she danced silently, compulsively, for hours. At first, people watched with confusion, then concern, then fear. Within a week, more than 30 people had joined her. By the end of the month, reports claimed up to 400 were dancing uncontrollably, sweating, shaking, moving like puppets whose strings couldn't be cut. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some suffered strokes or heart attacks. And yes, at least a dozen people died. The city of Strasbourg was terrified. Doctors were called, but their diagnosis? Excess blood heating the brain. Their prescription? More dancing. The city built a stage and hired musicians, thinking the afflicted could dance the madness out. It made things worse. Soon, the dancing spread beyond Strasbourg to neighboring towns. There were no feasts, no music festivals, only fear. People danced day and night, often in tattered clothes, their bodies barely able to keep moving. One theory blames ergot, a fungus on rye bread that can produce hallucinations and spasms similar to LSD. But mass poisoning affecting only dancers? Unlikely. Another theory, mass psychogenic illness, what we might call mass hysteria. Strasbourg in 1518 was a pressure cooker. Famine, disease, political instability. The population was deeply religious and terrified of divine punishment. In this state, people may have unconsciously entered trance-like episodes, mirroring each other's behavior in a kind of collective panic. Then there's the religious explanation. Some believed they were cursed by Saint Vitus, patron saint of dance and epilepsy. Many thought dancing was the only way to break the curse. The city eventually exiled the dancers to a shrine, barefoot and bloodied, to beg for forgiveness. The outbreak faded shortly after. The dancing plague faded from public memory, but it never truly disappeared. It wasn't the first, or even the last of its kind. Similar outbreaks occurred across medieval Europe, but 1518 was the deadliest. To this day, historians still debate what really happened. Was it madness? Poison? Spiritual terror? All we know for sure is this. In 1518, in one of the strangest corners of history, people danced until they died, and no one ever figured out why. Today, we're sailing back to the tumultuous waters of the early 19th century to meet one of the fiercest figures in maritime history. Buckle up as we dive into the fascinating story of the Pirate Queen, who commanded 80,000 men. Yes, you heard it right. A queen of pirates. This is the tale of Qing Shi. Qing Shi, born Xu Yang, was a Cantonese woman living in a male-dominated society in Guangzhou, China. Her life took a dramatic turn when she married the notorious pirate Cheng in 1801. Cheng commanded the Red Flag Fleet, a pirate confederation that terrorized the China Sea during the Qing Dynasty. It wasn't just any pirate fleet. It was a floating city of criminals, rebels, and seafaring warriors. Cheng died in 1807, and Qing Shi took over the reins. She seized control of the Red Flag Fleet, effectively putting her in command of an estimated 80,000 men spread across 800 ships. Qing Shi was more than just a figurehead. She implemented a strict code of laws within her fleet. For example, anyone who stole from the community chest or committed rape was executed immediately. And if a pirate took a captive as their wife, they were expected to remain faithful or face the death penalty. Her laws were brutal but effective, maintaining order and discipline in a fleet filled with cutthroats and renegades. Under Qing Shi's command, the Red Flag Fleet became an unstoppable force. They defeated the Chinese, Portuguese, and British navies, making her one of the most successful pirates in history. On August 6, 1945, the world changed forever. A U.S. bomber dropped the first atomic bomb over Hiroshima, Japan, killing tens of thousands in an instant. It was a level of destruction humanity had never seen before. But amid the chaos, one man survived. And just 3 days later, it happened again. This is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who lived through both atomic bombings. A man whose life was nearly erased twice, but who lived to tell the world what it felt like to stand at ground zero. Twice. Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old naval engineer working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. In early August 1945, he was on a business trip to Hiroshima, helping design oil tankers for the Japanese war effort. On the morning of August 6th, he was preparing to leave the city and return home to Nagasaki. Then the sky lit up. At 8:15 a.m., he saw a blinding flash. Like the magnesium light of a photographer, he later recalled. A moment later, the shockwave hit. The force threw him into a nearby field, scorching his face and arms and rupturing his eardrums. He had just witnessed the detonation of the world's first wartime atomic bomb. Hiroshima was devastated. Nearly everything within 2 kilometers of the blast was flattened. Fires swept through the ruins. Tens of thousands were dead. But Yamaguchi survived. Staggering through the burning city, he found his co-workers and spent a chaotic night in a bomb shelter. The next day, burned and barely functioning, he made his way to the train station. Unbelievably, the railway was still operating. He arrived on August 8th and sought medical care for his burns. The next day, August 9th, he reported to work at Mitsubishi's Nagasaki office, bandaged and exhausted. As he tried to explain to his boss what had happened in Hiroshima, his supervisor dismissed it. "You're crazy. One bomb can't destroy a whole city." Then it happened again. At 11:02 a.m., the second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. Yamaguchi had just enough time to hit the ground. The office was obliterated. Windows shattered. Buildings collapsed. Another flash. Another fireball. Another mushroom cloud. Once again, he survived. Yamaguchi's home was damaged, but his wife and child had survived. Miraculously, they had left the house to search for burn ointment just minutes before the bomb fell. But the suffering had only begun. Yamaguchi's wounds became infected. Hair fell out. His body swelled and blistered. For weeks, he drifted in and out of consciousness, surrounded by others dying slow, agonizing deaths. And yet he recovered. He lived. And not just for weeks or months. Yamaguchi went on to live for another 65 years. But in 2006, after the death of his son from cancer likely caused by radiation exposure, Yamaguchi began to speak out. He became a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament. In 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized him as a Niju Hibakusha, a double bomb survivor. He was the only person ever certified to have survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He told his story not to sensationalize, but to warn. "The reason that I hate the atomic bomb is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings," he once said. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died in 2010 at the age of 93. His story is more than a miracle. It's a message that even in the darkest moments of human history, a voice can rise from the ashes and call the world to choose peace. In 1901, a group of sponge divers off the coast of a tiny Greek island made a discovery that would baffle the world for more than a century. Among the ruins of a sunken Roman-era ship, they found statues, coins, and pottery. But buried in the mud was something no one could explain, a lump of corroded bronze and wood, broken, unrecognizable. But inside, gears. cogs. Precision, unlike anything ancient people were supposed to have. What they found was the Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old machine so advanced, some call it the world's first computer. The wreck was discovered near the island of Antikythera, between mainland Greece and Crete. The sponge divers had descended over 100 feet, struggling with primitive gear, when they stumbled upon the ancient shipwreck. At first, the find was what you'd expect: marble statues, jewelry, amphorae, typical Roman-era cargo. But as the artifacts were hauled up and catalogued in Athens, one strange object stood out: a chunk of greenish bronze, cracked and fused, with visible gears inside. At the time, no one knew what it was. Some thought it was an astrolabe. Others thought it was nothing more than a fancy clock. They couldn't have been more wrong. It took decades before anyone truly understood what the Antikythera mechanism was. CT scans and X-rays in the early 2000s revealed over 30 intricate bronze gears, interlocked with mathematical precision. The machine wasn't decorative, it was functional. Scholars realized it could track the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. It could predict eclipses. It even used a 4-year dial to track the ancient Olympic Games. This wasn't just a clock, it was a mechanical model of the cosmos. And it was built in the 2nd century BCE, over 1,500 years before anything like it would appear again in Europe. The front of the mechanism had a dial showing the zodiac and solar calendar. As you turned a crank, gears would rotate to show the position of the sun and moon on any given day. A second dial tracked lunar phases, even adjusting for the moon's elliptical orbit. On the back, spiral dials that predicted solar and lunar eclipses using an 18-year cycle known as the Saros cycle. Another dial kept track of the Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. All of this in a box the size of a shoebox. It's mechanical computing from ancient Greece. No one knows for sure who built the Antikythera mechanism. Some scholars believe it may be linked to the school of Archimedes, the famous Greek mathematician and inventor. Others think it came from Rhodes, home to a tradition of astronomical engineering. But there's one thing everyone agrees on. This wasn't a one-off. Whoever made it had experience and tools that have long since disappeared. The craftsmanship implies a lost lineage of ancient technology, one that vanished from history after the fall of classical civilization. Here's the most haunting part. Why was such advanced knowledge lost? After the Antikythera mechanism, we have no record of anything like it for over 1,000 years. The gears, the precision engineering, the astronomical insight, gone. Some think Roman society simply didn't value scientific instruments. Others blame wars, plagues, or the burning of libraries like Alexandria. Whatever the reason, the mechanism sits at the edge of historical memory. Proof that humans once reached farther than we ever imagined, only to forget. The Antikythera mechanism is more than just a relic. It's a whisper from the past, a reminder that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes, the future is buried beneath the waves, waiting to be rediscovered. If war breaks out between Israel and Iran, it almost certainly wouldn't stay between them. The United States has long supported Israel, both diplomatically and militarily. If Israel were threatened with destruction, the U.S. might intervene, especially if Iran were suspected of preparing a nuclear strike. Russia and China, on the other hand, have cultivated ties with Iran and might push back against any Western-led coalition. While direct intervention by Russia or China is less likely, proxy involvement, cyber attacks, arms shipments, or covert operations could escalate quickly. NATO countries, especially the UK and France, could be drawn in if the conflict threatens European stability or involves American forces. And then there's the wider Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, all could mobilize against Israel, pulling the region into chaos. If nuclear weapons are used, who would be the likely targets? Israel, though small, has layered air defenses, including the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow systems, capable of intercepting short to long-range missiles. But if Iran launched multiple warheads, or if any slipped through, Israel's urban centers like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem could be devastated. Iran, lacking nuclear weapons, according to current intelligence, would likely be hit in retaliation with conventional or, in a worst case, nuclear weapons. Strategic military bases, command centers, and possibly Tehran would be prime targets. If things spiral, U.S. bases across the Middle East, and even cities in Europe or American soil, could be at risk, depending on which powers get involved and what arsenals they deploy. The U.S. has around 5,200 nuclear warheads. Russia has over 5,800. China is rapidly expanding, with an estimated 500 and rising. France and the UK possess hundreds each. To understand the stakes, compare today's bombs to the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Hiroshima bomb was about 15 kilotons. Modern nuclear weapons? Many range from 100 to 1,000 kilotons, with some Russian warheads topping 5,000. A single modern warhead could level a city and kill hundreds of thousands, instantly, not counting fallout, fires, and long-term radiation sickness. Even a limited nuclear exchange between Israel and Iran could cause millions of deaths, disrupt the global economy, and spark mass refugee crises. If it escalates, the entire world could be pulled into the abyss. So, how likely is global nuclear war? Right now, it's unlikely, but not impossible. The greatest danger lies not in a full-scale plan, but in miscalculation. A misunderstood missile launch, a rogue actor, a cyber attack mistaken for an act of war. The real answer is chilling. Global nuclear war could happen, not because leaders want it, but because no one stops it in time. We live in a time of precision weapons, complex alliances, and fragile diplomacy. A spark in the Middle East could ignite far more than regional flames. Understanding these dynamics isn't fear-mongering, it's essential. If you found this video thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more hard-hitting and timely explorations into history, geopolitics, and global conflict. What happens when the most powerful man in the world believes he's a god and insists on proving it by fighting in the Colosseum? This isn't fiction. This is the story of Commodus, the Roman emperor who traded a crown for a wooden sword and dragged an empire into madness. Let's take a look at one of the most unbelievable rulers in history. Commodus was born in 161 CE, the son of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, one of the most respected leaders in Roman history. But Commodus wasn't like his father. Where Marcus was a philosopher king, Commodus was obsessed with spectacle. He was made co-emperor at just 15 years old, and when Marcus died, Commodus became the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. He inherited power at its peak, and then, almost immediately, started tearing it apart. At first, Commodus ruled like any other young emperor, relying on advisors, military generals, and the Senate. But something changed. He began seeing himself not just as a ruler, but as a god. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. Statues were erected of him dressed as Hercules, club in hand and lion skin draped over his shoulders. He believed he was Hercules reborn, destined to conquer through brute strength, not diplomacy. And to prove it, he needed an arena. In a shocking break from imperial dignity, Commodus began fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum. This wasn't ceremonial. He entered the arena in front of tens of thousands of Roman citizens, not in armor, but dressed like a demigod. He fought wild animals. He challenged gladiators. He used a wooden sword so he wouldn't be harmed. But his opponents weren't so lucky. The fights were rigged, of course. No one dared to actually hurt the emperor. But Commodus treated every staged victory like divine proof of his greatness. Sometimes, he even charged the Roman treasury a massive fee for each appearance, 1,000,000 sesterces per fight, bankrupting the empire for his vanity. Commodus didn't just fight in the arena. He turned Rome into a stage for his delusions. He renamed the months of the calendar after his titles. He renamed the legions, the ships, even the gods, all after himself. He ordered statues of himself placed in temples, demanded worship from his subjects, and declared himself the conqueror of 1,000 gladiators. The Senate, powerless and humiliated, tried to maintain the illusion of order, but Rome was unraveling. Meanwhile, the people of Rome, many of them poor and hungry, were forced to cheer for the emperor in his self-glorifying battles. To boo was treason. Behind the spectacle was a reign of paranoia and brutality. Commodus executed senators, generals, and former friends. He banished his sister for suspected treason. He surrounded himself with sycophants and allowed corrupt advisors to run the empire while he trained for more arena battles. One of his most infamous displays came when he slaughtered 100 lions in a single day, from the safety of a balcony. Another time, he executed a man with a club to mimic Hercules' legendary kills. It wasn't a battle. It was a show of dominance, a message that he decided who lived or died. Rome, once the center of reason and law, had become a circus ruled by a madman in costume. By 192 CE, Commodus had declared himself both consul and gladiator champion. He planned to celebrate the new year dressed as a gladiator and to rule as both god and emperor forever. But not everyone was willing to let that happen. His inner circle, including his mistress, his wrestling coach, and the city's top officials, began plotting. Rome was teetering, and Commodus was a danger to everyone, including himself. On December 31st, 192 CE, they made their move. After poisoning his food failed, they sent in a wrestler named Narcissus, who strangled the emperor in his bath. The god emperor died not in battle, but naked, betrayed, and alone. Rome rejoiced. The Senate declared Commodus a public enemy, destroyed his statues, and tried to erase his name from history. But they couldn't erase the story. The tale of an emperor who fancied himself a god, who fought fake battles while the empire burned, has echoed through time, as a warning of what happens when delusion meets absolute power. Centuries later, his story inspired films, books, and legends, including the movie Gladiator. But the truth, the real story of Commodus, is even stranger than fiction. Because in the Roman Empire, sometimes the most dangerous man wasn't a barbarian at the gates. It was the emperor in the arena,